Welcome back to the Mental Game Podcast. I am your host, David Tendler. Very excited to be back with another great show. Today, my guest is David Tuchman. And for those who don't know David, he is an accomplished poker player in his own right, but perhaps an even more accomplished poker commentator. Live at the Bike, he's been on Sky Poker, he's now on Twitch, and of course he's done the World Series of Poker live streams for years now. It's hard to remember actually when he wasn't doing them. So he's commentated on perhaps more poker than anybody else in the world. And he's also then commentated with some of the most high-level poker players in the world. So the guy has just a ton of experience playing poker, talking about poker, and he's also an accomplished coach as well. So he was a great person to talk to about mastery, about learning, and that was a big chunk of our discussion. We also talk a bit about the mental game of commentating, the hard work versus talent debate, and we also talk a bit about the 10,000 hour rule, which does apply to learning. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end of the interview, because at one point in the discussion we were talking about it, and I don't really like what I had to say about it. I think I was unprepared to speak about it educatedly, so I'm going to do so a little bit after the interview. And as I mentioned in the last episode, for those who have not yet gotten a free copy of The Mental Game of Poker 1 or 2 on audiobook, you can still do so by going to jaredtendlerpoker.com/free and getting more information. Also, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, so every time a new episode comes out, it's automatically on your phone or device that you listen to. So without further ado, here is my interview with David. David, thank you so much for coming on the show today, man. I feel like it's quite an honor to have you on, in part because I feel like you are so much more experienced in interviewing people and being on radio and things of this sort. So I feel humbled to have you on. So thanks, man.
No need to be humbled, please. I have no idea what I'm doing. For some reason, they keep hiring me.
Well, you pretend to do it very well, then, at least.
Yeah, that's the game, right? Just pretend you know what you're doing.
Exactly, until you figure out something. Yeah. So you've got a radio show. You have put in thousands of hours of commentating on poker. You are a poker coach and obviously a player yourself. Obviously, all of those things have to feed into each other, meaning that they kind of help you get better at all of those individually. But I wonder if you're the kind of guy that is very active at kind of trying to be better at each of those individual things, or are you kind of the guy that just gets better by doing things?
I think it's a little bit of both, to be honest. I think naturally, if you do something often, if you practice something a lot, whether it be golf, tennis, poker, or whatever it might be, you're bound to get better. Now, there's an adage of if you have a bad habit and you just keep playing it, you're doing the same bad thing over and over again, all you're doing is reinforcing that bad habit. But I think as human beings, we naturally, we can see what works and what doesn't work, and naturally will improve. And my guess would be like if you tried it, if you just played golf, even if you never played before, but you played every single day for the next 6 months, even without a lesson, my guess would be you'd be bound, you definitely would improve. That said, you're bound to get a lot better and improve at a more rapid rate if you work on your craft as well. So, I'm definitely one of those guys who works on my game as a poker player and as a commentator and a broadcaster a ton. In fact, I've recently kind of jumped on Twitch and I watch some of the esport commentators. I watch Jason Somerville and I see what other people do and I try to, figure out, okay, what do I like that they're doing? What don't I like that they're doing? What works? What could I incorporate into my own what I do every single day. And at the same time, sometimes I'll listen to myself. That can be a little, make me a little nauseous at times, to be honest. I don't think anybody likes listening to their own self or whatever and their own commentary. But, I do try to kind of review my shows and see what works and what doesn't work.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so that repetition coming from many different facets, there's that idea of the 10,000 hour rule, which I think is a little misleading because I think the value of a repetition matters. You were talking about developing bad habits as an example of that, And so I guess the question is, like, do you feel like there's like a different value? Like, if we think about you watching like or commentating for 10 hours, like what would that translate into poker play, for example, in terms of the impact and how it would have on your play, and then vice versa from poker back to commentating? Like, do you think there's a value relationship that exists in those things?
Yeah, I think there certainly is. Before I get to that, what is this 10,000 hour rule?
Oh, you've never heard of it?
No.
Oh, so yeah, there's this idea out there. I think Malcolm Gladwell was the one that popularized it. That basically you can master something within like by essentially putting in 10,000 hours of work. I'm sure that there are more details to it, but that's the essence of it. And I think if you really think about it, like full-time work, 40 hours a week, 50 weeks out of a year is 2,000 hours. So, the idea that you can master something within like 5 to 6 years seems a little bit fuzzy to me, especially if you're talking about some of the elite sports in the world. Poker maybe, but yeah, I think it's I think quality matters a lot.
Malcolm's never seen me play basketball. I guess if his definition of master is you can be the best that you could possibly be, then maybe you could master it. Getting to your question though, it's funny. I was a hockey coach, and I still play hockey. And when I was coaching, I did a lot of work trying to figure out, okay, how do you reach these children, and how do you what's the best way to coach and teach these kids what you want to learn. My wife's also a teacher as well, so I'm always kind of really intrigued about coaching and teaching and how do we learn. And I've heard the adage of, and I might be messing up these percentages, but you'll get the point. Basically, it is, you learn 10% of what you read. Oh, no, you learn 10% of what is read to you. You learn like 25% of what you read. You learn 40% of what you write down, but you learn 70% of what you teach. So when I was coaching hockey, one of the things that I actually did on a weekly basis was I made my players – on an individual basis, like let's say we were going to learn the power play this week and we were going to go over that in practice. I would make all my players come to practice an hour early to go over like chalk talk, so we could go over what we were going to do in practice, and this is the power play, and this is what we're going to try to implement into the game. But what I would do is I would have two of my players during the week come up with a way to teach. So I would actually contact two of the players, go over it with them, and then they would be forced to come in that during practice and teach it to the other rest of the kids.
That's awesome.
And I found that really helped because, first of all, the other kids were more engaged than just having some adult lecture to them. And at the same time, and the two people that had to teach it were way more engaged. So if I take that over to poker, I can tell you that being a poker commentator, when I'm focusing on the analysis side of it, and not so much the entertainment side of it. And that obviously depends on who's in the commentary booth with me, what show we're covering, so forth and so on. I get a lot out of it because, I'm sitting there and not only am I learning by watching these players do it, and I'm watching great players make great plays, and I'm watching great players make mistakes, but at times I'm trying to explain what they're doing to, an amateur at home watching. And I think, no matter who you are, I don't see how that couldn't help you play and work on it. I don't know, in terms of, like I said, what signifies, how many hours of commentary would equal how many hours of playing. I don't know how to quantify it like that, but I can definitely tell you there is a correlation.
Right. Yeah, and going back to this 70% of what you teach, which I think is a really fascinating idea. Again, the percentage is less important than its kind of relationship to passive learning or even active learning, but just in different form. It really is kind of you have to prove that you know something. It's like you force those kids to really study what you were doing to the effect that they could actually explain it. Which reminds me of a quote that I love from Einstein, which is, "You don't really understand something until you can explain it to your grandmother."
Yeah,
and I gotta think that it's a similar sort of phenomenon. Like these kids are learning from you, then they've got to be able to explain it to their peers to prove that they know it as well.
Yeah, I mean, the simple statement of, when somebody says, define this word, okay, now use it in a sentence.
Right.
And it's as simple as that, but it's the truth. And,
not like a Pat went to see Matt kind of sentence.
Right, no. But I mean, I think it's one of those reasons why, as poker players, the players that have friends that are like-minded individuals that discuss poker and go back and forth with it, where, they're forced to explain their line, quote unquote, and how they played a hand and what their thought process was. And then their friend across the table is kind of going back and forth. And in a way, they're teaching each other. I think that's invaluable.
Agreed. And I think that's one of the reasons why forums are so popular. I mean, I think there are people who observe it and think, like, what is this guy doing giving away so much of his time to help other people? And it's exactly that. It's just a medium where there really isn't any downside to giving somebody's feedback. It's not like you're getting paid, right? So, you may develop a bad reputation on a forum. I mean, there's really not much harm in that. But at least for me, kind of getting my feet wet in poker, that was actually one of the biggest ways that I think I enhanced my understanding both of poker, but also of my material was these Ask Jared threads, these Q&A threads where I remember the original one on 2+2. I think there was like 1,000 comments, and probably half of them were mine, and that much time spent answering people's questions absolutely elevated my game as a coach to levels that I don't know that could have been done had I not done that.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, I think a lot of people, I get asked the question all summer long, how did so-and-so get so good? What do you do to improve your game? I think people underestimate how much time some of the best players in the game put into their game. Whether it be the Doug Polks of the world or the Daniel Negreanu's of the world or whoever it might be, these are guys who spend, hundreds of hours away from the table working on their game.
You are around a lot of amateur poker players who have that thought in terms of underestimating the amount of time that the best players spend working on theirs. Do you have any idea why they think that way? I'm
trying to think. I guess in a way it's an easier excuse than it's much easier to say, okay, I can tell you, actually, this is perfect. I'll go back to my hockey background here. As a kid, I've always wanted, I grew up playing hockey. I started skating when I was 3 years old. I played in college. I had dreams of playing in the NHL. As I got older, the excuse was, I wasn't big enough. If I was like 6'2", 200, I think I probably would have made it. And it was very easy and a very convenient excuse rather than saying what might have been the truth, which was either A, I'm not good enough, or B, I didn't work hard enough at it. And B is really, really hard to say because, for a lot of us, we don't want to say something like, wow, I could have obtained what I wanted if I had worked harder. And there comes a point in life where I can now look at myself in the mirror and I go, hey, maybe I wouldn't have been good enough. I don't know. But I know for sure I didn't work hard enough at it. I didn't put the hours in as a child that I needed to and growing up to obtain this goal. And I think for poker players the same way, when you are not achieving the results that you want to achieve, it's much easier to blame the cards, the dealer, luck, whatever it might be, your bankroll, your situation, whatever, rather than something that you actually can control, which is just hard work.
I think that's really good insight, man. When do you know when you had that realization that you may not have worked hard enough at hockey?
I don't know if there's a pinpoint time. I'd like to say there was like an epiphany where I was like, yeah. But no, I don't think there was. I think it was just, I got a little bit older and I was talking about it and,
I guess part of the reason I'm asking is like, do you feel like that you're now putting in that kind of work? Like, obviously you don't get a redo in hockey, but here you've got an opportunity and I should say taken the most of an opportunity in front of you in terms of what you've created in poker. And I don't know, I just wonder if the amount that you're working is in relationship to realizing, that it just takes that to be successful at whatever you want to do, and having not maybe done enough of that in hockey was some of the kind of the lessons learned from that.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think you're spot on in that regard. And my guess would be it probably occurred somewhere in the last like 6-7 years.
Yeah.
Where I was hanging out and I was telling the story of if I was probably hanging out with a buddy of mine who played Major League Baseball, played in the minors, got drafted by the Cardinals. The kid's like 6'3", 215, runs a 4.5, and he was just born like this.
Oh yeah.
And I always kind of joke around. I'm like, God, if I had your body, I would have made it. And then I kind of like, it was just, I don't know. I just called myself on it. I just said, I don't know if I can curse on the show or not, but
absolutely.
I just said bullshit to myself. And I just realized, especially as a coach, I realized, that I just didn't work hard enough at it. And like I said, I still might not have been good enough, but I never gave myself that chance.
Right.
And I mean, it's not like I was like, this lazy kid who didn't put any work in, but if you want to achieve things, and I think having a child even more so, I tell him every single day, he's only 2, but 100%, I say, you can do whatever you want, but you got to work for it.
Yep.
Dreams aren't worth a damn unless you're willing to put the effort in, and you're willing to work harder than the guy next to you. So I think, when it comes to poker, when it comes to, even nowadays, I'm putting a ton of time into daily fantasy sports, realizing that there's money to be made there. And I feel like I have an edge, but I can tell you over the first 4 weeks of the season, I put a lot of time in. I was having dinner with a friend last night after I did some commentary, and we were talking about it. And he's like, "How many hours are you putting in?" And I was like, "I don't know, probably a good like 12, 15 hours a week of real studying, and analyzing the game and watching some tape and seeing where the matchups are. I'm putting in a lot of time." And I'm also doing that with poker, and I'm doing that with commentary. And I think, maybe it comes with age. Maybe it comes with a lesson learned, whatever it might be in your life. But I am a true believer in the fact that you can achieve almost anything you want in life if you're willing to bust your ass.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is that in the past you thought it was more about talent. And now realizing that, talent counts, and like you said, you may not have that kind of body, and maybe you needed it plus the hard work to make the NHL. But without the hard work, you got no shot. And regardless of what you're going to accomplish in your life, if you at least put in the hard work, at least you'll find out what at least was close to your potential in something.
Yeah, I think in poker, I think it's clear that there are some players that just have an innate ability, and their instinct is just a level above anybody else's.
Yeah. I think like anything else. Like the Jordans of the world, the Tigers of the world, the Nadals and Federers of the world. They're freakish athletes that you just can't replicate unless you've got something close to that.
Right, but if you want to find success, I think hard work trumps talent when it comes to that.
Agreed. Unless you're Bo Jackson, and then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. Don't worry. If you look in the mirror and you're Bo Jackson, don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry. You have nothing to worry about. Did you watch that 30 for 30 about him?
I watched them all.
Oh my God.
It's the one thing I DVR all the 30 for 30s because I think they're brilliant.
I thought the funniest part of that was he had this huge like weight room area in his house that he just had because people didn't believe that he didn't work out.
It's so scary. Like I said, my friend, the same guy, same thing. He's still, by the way, he's like a chef now in Los Angeles.
And he's cut.
His professional, athletic career is over. He's married and he's a chef, but he's still, obviously he's still 6'2" or 6'3", whatever he is. And he's still got probably under 10% body fat. We go play golf. He's never played the game before and he's driving the ball 350 yards. I'm just like, go to hell. Leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly. So shifting gears a little bit, my interest in the mental game is obviously what kind of drives this show, and so I'm curious if there are mental game issues that you've had in relation to commentating. Aside from like guests being late or malfunction errors, the variance of commentating. But like, have you noticed any tendencies or things that you've had to work through in commentating?
Obviously, as you mentioned, I put a lot of hours into commentary. I can tell you some stuff that kind of gets me on tilt, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I hate not being prepared. And it frustrates me to no end when I don't have, the stuff that I need. I always tell, whoever I'm working with, I said, the more information that I have, the easier it is for me to relay that information to our audience, which is what I have to do. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just, I am just the giver of information. I'm trying to make it easier for you to watch this stream at home. And so the more information that I have, the better. And it, this is to my own detriment and my own fault. Sometimes if it's a problem getting the information on time, or for whatever reason we have a hiccup and I feel like I'm scrambling, it can definitely put me off a little bit. So, it's one of those things where you just kind of got to settle down and realize that, it's just part of what you do. And sometimes things are going to go really smoothly and sometimes they're not, and be willing to kind of just, go with the flow.
And is there a parallel to that in poker? Like, do you feel like if you're not prepared either mentally or just in terms of what you're going to be focused on in that session, that you don't play poker to the same level either?
I think the parallel in poker would be have the ability to kind of roll with the punches, like understand that. And this is the one thing that I've been able to do as a commentator. Just understand and accept the fact that you are not completely in control and everything is not going to go your way. So be adaptable and be ready when there's a bump in the road, basically. You know what I mean? Don't let it get to you.
And is there like a have fun ethic in that as well? Like, I mean, I can see that in poker too. Like sometimes it can be so serious that when things happen, like if you can have a bit of humor or can see a little bit of humor in it, it can just kind of lighten things. Yeah,
I mean, I think that probably helps. I mean, I for me, it does at least. I mean, I would assume that whatever your personality is, that's probably ideal. In terms of if you're not naturally a humorous person and you don't laughing and stuff like that doesn't put you at ease. I couldn't imagine anybody not having that quality, but I'm sure some people don't. But for me, yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're able to laugh it off and just have fun with it and roll with the punches, it's obviously going to be a much better show. I mean, I can tell you. I remember when I was doing, I was broadcasting the NFL for Sky Sports, and it was the first time I had ever anchored a show. And I'm anchoring a show there, and so I basically have the Kurt Menefee role or the James Brown role on CBS and Fox.
Yeah, like the core anchor, kind of bouncing it between the analysts.
Right, exactly. So I'm in the studio. We're not actually doing the play-by-play of the game. We are like the halftime show, the pregame show, And anyway, I just I kind of imploded a little bit. It was the first time I had ever done it, anchoring on this larger stage. And I made a mistake, and rather than just laughing it off and having fun with it and making fun of myself, I kind of got in my head. I was like, So, and that just made it 10 times worse. For anybody that has like an acting background, that I've done some acting, it's one of those weird things where, if you're in an audition and you start thinking in your head, like, they don't like me. Why don't they like me? What can I do to make them like me? What if I did this? Suddenly you're not in that present moment, and there's no way it can be any good. So I've kind of come to the conclusion, you realize, like, whether you're working for ESPN or Sky Sports or wherever you might be, even if you're having a conversation with a girl, if you're trying to meet a girl and you're trying to pick somebody up, if something happens, if you make fun of it, you can bring attention to it. If you laugh at it and you're not afraid to laugh at yourself, first of all, you become way more relatable. People end up usually laughing with you, and it puts the entire situation at ease. So for me, as a poker player, as a commentator, I should say, that really helped me. I don't know how that relates to playing poker at the table, because obviously it's a different animal. But I think the ability to be able to roll with different situations is a very a good one to have.
Yeah, whether it's laughing or whether it's at least just more at your core, realizing how much you don't control and having an attitude that reflects your personality about how to deal with that stuff when, the variance of, look, there's a lot of variance in live poker that goes beyond just the cards too. You've got TV screens around you, you've got other tables kind of hooting and hollering, you've got, cocktail waitresses. I mean, there's lots of stuff that can be distracting and can be irritating, and gamesmanship type stuff that can get in your head if you allow it, really.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, in fact, I can tell you an example. I mean, I was playing the other night, and I had lost a hand early, and for whatever reason, I don't know why, I was annoyed at something. And then, there was a drunk player at the table, and he was just so loud. And then he moved over to the seat next to me, and I just realized that I was not going to be able to play my A game, and I got up and left, which is, pretty bad, actually, in my opinion, because it was a good game, and I should be able to, at this point in my career, just kind of like roll with it and have fun with it. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it was something that happened at home. I don't remember exactly, but I recognized that I was not going to be able to play my A game, and I just got up and left.
What I would suggest in scenarios like that, and this goes to you and anybody listening at home, if there's a reaction that you're not sure of, like kind of like what you ought to do, or you feel like you should be able to handle it better, just start writing about like the description. Just start writing a description of what happened and everything that you think related to getting to the point where you knew it was just kind of at a tipping point, and then start to kind of dig into it and ask yourself some why questions, like, why did this bother me? What can I do about it? And basically, once you have that description, you can start trying to break it down and perhaps start to realize some flaws within that. Then can be the point of correction, because I think there's going to be a lot of situations that are uncontrollable, because our mental games evolve just as much as our technical games evolve. So, to say that you should be able to play a particular spot properly given your level of experience, is sometimes a little bit unreasonable. So, yeah, I think that's just sort of a fairly easy way of at least starting to figure it out. And if it is as simple as you think, then going through that process, you'll probably realize some things pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah, I can concur. I mean, that makes sense. A lot of times for me, writing something down makes it real.
Yeah.
Makes any sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the mind, like, you have thoughts in your mind. I mean, how many times have we had a thought that you think is genius or you think is the funniest thing in the world, and as soon as you say it out loud, you realize how dumb or idiotic it is? I think the mind has this sort of like limitless playground quality to it that once you actually externalize it, either write it or say it, it changes quality. It's almost like you're teaching. The example we were talking about earlier, between learning something and actually expressing it are two very different things. And when it gets expressed, especially for the first time, you really get to kind of see it for what it is.
Right. If you ask my wife, by the way, I pretty much about a dozen times a day, I have a brilliant thought inside that doesn't translate when it comes out.
Yeah, I have a similar phenomenon. It actually was in our vows that she said something to the effect of, I promise to laugh at your jokes, and when you have brilliant ideas, I promise to kind of stick with it long enough to be able to understand what the hell you're actually trying to say. I'm pretty sure she didn't use the word hell in her vows, but it was something to that effect.
Right.
So yeah, I know it well. So obviously with your commentary experience, and we've got the World Series final table coming up fairly soon. What is your opinion about the final table, specifically the main event final table, and in terms of the amount of pressure that the players are under when they're there? I mean, do you feel like it's comparable to some of the elite sporting things like the Super Bowl or the World Series? I mean, you're obviously a sports buff, so you're got a unique position on this. So what's your feeling on that?
I mean, first of all, by the way, just a little plug. World Series of Poker Europe commentary is actually starting this weekend.
Where can people listen?
WSOP, twitch.tv/WSOP. I am doing commentary from Los Angeles, but the tournaments are taking place in Berlin. So, and I think we start at it's on Berlin time. So we're on at 3 in the Pacific time. But it's going to be constantly replayed all day. So check that out.
Awesome.
And so there's just a lot of cool stuff. In terms of addressing your question, I actually think there's more pressure on a poker player, and there's a reason why. First of all, I think when you're playing a sport, once you start playing, I think there's a tremendous amount of adrenaline that's built up in the beginning, and I think once whether you play football and you take that first hit, or you're a shortstop and you get the first ground ball to you and you field it cleanly and you throw them out, or whatever it might be, the pitcher who throws the first pitch, and obviously
golfer off the first tee.
Exactly. Once you do that and you hear the first roar, then you're just playing a game that you played for a very long time. And for the vast majority of these players, they are not playing for their livelihood in the sense that they've made the Super Bowl. Whether they win or lose, the money bonus, and I know they get a small amount of a little bit extra money for winning the Super Bowl, that money is pretty insignificant compared to their actual contracts. So while I think there's a tremendous amount of pressure for these guys, when I compare that to a poker player who, first of all, has never been on that stage, ever. He's not a professional athlete who has, he wasn't the star of his high school football team and then the star of his college football team. And then he hasn't played, 48 games in the NFL and had fans cheering him on and played in front of 100,000 people, and he's making millions. This is a poker player who could be you or me or any kid who's so shy. I mean, I spent some time with Josh Beckley over the summer down in Florida when I was covering the Poker Night in America cash game and tournament down there. And we went on a boat together, and he's a great kid. But he's a kid. I mean, make no mistake. This is a shy, little bit of an introvert who's never been even remotely on a stage like this. And now you're putting him on, on ESPN where, hundreds of thousands of people are going to watch him. So you've got one level of it where not only do I want to look good, not only do I not want to make a fool of myself, but holy shit, I'm also playing for life-changing money, and I may never have another opportunity like this again. So when I compare that to the Russell Wilsons of the world or, the Matt Harveys of the world, I mean, Matt Harvey is going to be pitching for the New York Mets in a few days against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Matt Harvey's going to, provided he stays healthy, this is a guy who's going to get a $100 million contract regardless of how he pitches, in the playoffs. So, and he's also pitched in New York under the bright lights numerous times. He can't walk, down a boulevard in New York City without getting approached by, dozens of fans. So, he's been in the limelight before. When you compare that to these poker players, they are, I think for the most part, very ill-equipped to deal with what they have to deal with on the stage. That's
really, really cool perspective, man. I've thought about like what the PGA Tour would look like if the players had to put up their own money. I think it would be an interesting scenario, but I think what you're saying it really makes a lot of sense when I think about it now. So my follow-up question to that now seems kind of dumb, but I'm curious what you've seen over the years, just in terms of the importance of the mental game. Obviously, is critical given the chance to kind of choke and piss on yourself there. So I'm assuming you agree with that. So then I'll ask a better question, which is, have you seen guys actually choke in those scenarios? Like, is that something that you, having watched thousands of hours of poker, can you see somebody basically choke?
Not only, I mean, I think we've all seen players choke. Whether it was, I think it was Lazar back in 2005 when Joe Hashem won, or, I mean, every single year there's a poker player. And by the way, almost every single final table that I cover each summer at the World Series, you can point to a player that, call it choke, call it play, less than optimal, whatever you want to call it. They went back and said, why did I do that? I never play this way. But whether it was the lights or the cameras, or the crowds or the money, whether it was a lack of focus, I think all of those things, I mean, as poker players, we're not using our physical tools, but we're using our mental tools. And I think all of these things, affect our decision-making process. And at the end of the day, all of these players got there because they have, they're very good at making decisions. Let's assume that they, nobody got lucky, that lucky for 6 days straight or 7 days straight or whatever it was. I'm not discounting luck, of course, but let's just assume that they all made great decisions to get there. I think to think that the decision-making process is not going to be affected by all the factors that are going on at these final tables, when the money is crazy and everything else is going on is a little bit naive. And I think when it comes down to it, the player that is the most focused on the task at hand and the player that is most in the moment, most present, I think is probably the most likely to succeed. I mean, I think when Greg Merson won it a couple of years ago, not only, is he an incredibly talented poker player, but you can point to the fact that he made a World Series of Poker final table just a few months ago and won a bracelet, had the experience of being at a final table, won a ton of money. I think that was invaluable for him.
One of the thoughts I've had about the final table, specifically the main event final table, is it ends up becoming like a battle of C games, so to speak. Like, not necessarily that a player's C game is going to be the only thing that gets exposed there. There obviously are flashes of great decision making and great play, but more to the effect of like whose C game is like the least bad, so to speak. What do you think of that idea?
I don't know if I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I think, when we look at our champion from last year, Jacobson, he played great. And I think it was just, you watched him play and he was just so calm. It was this weird kind of like storm going around you, but he was just calm in it and comfortable. And I think there goes a lot to that. And not getting caught up in the fervor that is the main event and the final and the final table and the money. I mean, people don't realize also, whether you're playing a $500 tournament or a $1,500 tournament or the main event, when you enter that tournament, you're playing a $10,000 tournament. When you get to the final table, you're basically now playing a $15 million sit and go.
Right.
It's just, and the same thing goes for the $1,500 tournaments where at the beginning you're pretty comfortable. We all sit there and go, $1,500, I can afford that. But by the time you get to the final table, you're talking about playing a $3 million or a $2 million sit and go. And the money that, most of us are just not prepared to play for that kind of money. And it's amazing at how different the play is. And I mean, I guess you point to C game because a lot of these players are just kind of like playing very, very safe so they don't make a mistake. Things that they certainly didn't do to get there.
Exactly.
So maybe there is some validity to what you say in sense of whose C game is better than the other person's C game and who can somehow, block out the noise and play their best game.
Basically, and I think on some level that's like, to me, I think that's success at any major sporting event too. I think about the Seahawks losing on the goal line last year, and I think Pete Carroll choked. I think that was evidence of his C game showing up in a moment where it just can't show up. And it's like in poker, the same kind of stuff is happening all the time. I mean, you can very easily make mistakes that cost you not only a world title, but also, millions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, people have talked about quarterbacks in the NFL since we're on that kind of, level or like goalies in hockey where it's just when you're in the middle of a tornado or a hurricane, somehow the players on the ice or the players in the huddle can look at the quarterback and the quarterback just has a calmness in his way and he goes, okay, guys, we got a minute and 46 seconds. Let's go. 82 yards.
Right.
And that's what separates the best in the business from, the good. That's what separates the Tom Brady's and the Joe Montanas from the rest of the pack. There's just, and as fans, we just know it, and it's just they instill this confidence. I mean, you got to imagine, hey, if you're a Patriots fan and you give Tom Brady a minute and 46 seconds, you're home, you feel really confident. What do you think the players in the huddle are feeling?
Right.
Same confidence, and that goes a long way. And whether you're on the ice and you've got a goalie behind you that's going to stand on his head and make every save that he has to make and then make a few that he shouldn't make, that's going to give you a lot of confidence as well. And I think the same thing in poker. So, I mean, I think if you've been there before and you know what to expect and you're capable of making these decisions in the middle of a hurricane, it'll be that much easier the next time. And I can tell you from a broadcaster's point of view, That's certainly true. Like I said, I go back the first time I ever covered NFL for Sky Sports, and the first time something went bad, I kind of imploded. Well, fast forward, 3 years, and something went bad, and I just laughed at it, and I made a mistake, and I was like, look at that, or I misspoke, and I just made fun of my own English, and then suddenly I had the analyst next to me just laughing alongside.
Proving how much you learn from your failure, from your mistake, in a sense.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, not even a question. But it's also a matter of, though, not just proving how much you learn from your mistake, but also proving, in a sense, how much your past success. Either A, I will give you 2 examples. Either A, your past success giving you the confidence that you can do it going forward, and also your past failure. Not just learning how to do it, but also realizing that the failure wasn't so bad. You know what I mean? In a weird sense, like I'll go back to the dating analogy. If you could somehow convince your 14-year-old nephew to ask the girl out that he likes, and at the end of the day, we're saying, what's the worst thing that could happen? She'll say no. And in his head, that is just the worst thing in the life. That's just awful. But if somehow we could convince that kid that it's not so bad.
And it might actually be good.
Right, exactly. So in a weird way, it was like me failing the very first time I did the show, yet still having a job, people still thinking I was pretty good at what I did.
You weren't on like a loop on the internet with people watching it.
Right, exactly. It wasn't like, the worst thing that I thought could have happened on the air happened, and it wasn't that bad. So that kind of gave me this freedom where I was like, oh, okay, well, if that was the worst thing that could happen, let's roll.
Great parting advice, David. Thank you so much for the time today, man. It was awesome to talk with you, and lots of insights that I wasn't even prepared to handle, and just really enjoyed all of it, man. Thank you.
My pleasure, man. Hey, I'm a huge fan of yours as well. I tell people all the time, I think, you can, when it comes to poker specifically, there's, knowing how to play technically, knowing the mathematics, so knowing all that stuff is very important. But if you don't wrap your head around the mental side of the game, and this is, don't kid yourself, this is a very mental game, you won't find much success at the table. And I'm a huge fan of what you do.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that very much. Thanks again to David for coming on the show today. It was really one of the more enjoyable conversations I've had about the mental game. Intelligent guy. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. He's Tuck on Sports. You can go to his website, which is also tuckonsports.com. And he's also a coach at crushlivepoker.com. He's live streaming the World Series of Poker main event right now, so be sure to check that out. And, of course, be on the lookout for when he's talking about poker, because you want to tune in. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to follow up on the 10,000-hour rule, because I was kind of bumbling over my response to it, and wanted to talk a bit more intelligently about it. The 10,000-hour rule was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers, and he highlights the research done by a man named Anders Ericsson, who's a Swedish researcher, who had discovered that, on average, elite performers like the Beatles, Bill Gates, had amassed 10,000 hours of deep practice prior to kind of breaking out. So the Beatles were performing in these kind of underground clubs. Maybe they weren't even underground clubs, but they were performing in clubs for many, many years, like long hour shows before they kind of before they kind of broke out and were famous. And Bill Gates snuck into a computer lab and was doing computer coding for hours on end while he was in high school before founding Microsoft. Now, the idea that has been debunked about the 10,000-hour rule is that it's obviously an oversimplification to just say that hours or time is the factor that matters most to developing mastery for something. And time is an important factor, but of course repetition matters a lot. The quality of your practice matters a lot. And in recent years, actually, Anders Ericsson has come out and saying that his sort of 10,000-hour rule has kind of taken on a life that he didn't intend for it. And of course, quality and the type of practice matters a lot. And then he also goes on to say that in some industries, in some places, 10,000 hours is not nearly sufficient for developing mastery or developing the skill set needed for elite level of success. And not to mention that, and he's not necessarily saying this, I don't want to misquote him, but we have to really understand the role that talent plays. So talent in poker may come in the form of, at least maybe in live poker, somebody having better handle on nonverbal communication. They may have greater intelligence, just natural intelligence. For online poker, they may have greater mathematical abilities. There is no doubt that talent exists. At what percentage we can rely on talent being the predictive factor for success, it's hard to really know, and I don't think it really matters, to be honest. I just think we have to understand that I will never be as good of a basketball player as Jordan. I'll never be as good of a golfer as Tiger, no matter how much I practice. Tiger has kind of fallen off recently, so obviously talent isn't the only thing. But there's no way that two people putting in 10,000 hours of even the exact same hypothetical practice, one person happens to be a little bit more talented. There's no way that those two people are going to have the same levels of success. Talent is going to be the differentiator in that regard. So having a stronger mental game obviously can relate to greater levels of success, having greater intelligence or having greater talent, having better practice skills. Like, there are many different ways you can create points of differentiation, and there are lots of people who have been very successful without having a lot of talent, who have been able to get a lot more out of their practice and out of the work that they put into the game. So that's my spiel on the 10,000 hour rule. It, at least at a minimum, got people thinking that you couldn't just achieve success easily, but we don't want to oversimplify it in saying you've got to put in 5 years of full-time work and then you're going to be a master at something, because you could be practicing very poorly, you could be getting bad advice. There are lots of things that could go wrong in that scenario where time as a factor is just not really that valuable. Okay, rant over. The other thing I want to mention is that I want to, in the spirit of continuing to expand the way that this podcast is done, I want to make one of the next upcoming episodes to be dedicated just to Q&As. So submit your questions. You can email me on my website. You can either go to jaredtendler.com or jaredtendlerpoker.com, find the contact button, send me an email with your question, and the best questions are the ones that I think have the most relevance for the most people. I'll be reading and answering in one of the next upcoming podcasts. You can also subscribe to my newsletter on either of those websites, and then just reply back to the emails that you get from me regarding your question. So if your question doesn't get answered, I may use it in a future podcast. This is kind of all still being developed. So your feedback is appreciated, and we'll see where this all goes. But I'm having fun doing the show again. I hope you all are enjoying it so far. And until next time, I wish you all very well.